All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, August the 6th, 2024. We're calling the work session of the Wake County Board of Education into order. I welcome everybody here. We've got 8 of our 9 members present. One just stepped out temporarily. I know she'll be back. And we'll proceed with our agenda. The first item we have is addressing school utilization concerns. And we have Mr. Carrozza and anybody else on staff?
Staff is in New York.
Okay. All right, we'll pick it up from there. Anytime that you're ready, you can go.
So staff is bringing to you a presentation that we presented partly at the Facilities Committee meeting in June, and then again at the July board work session. So here, we're going to finish up the presentation that we had shared with you last time. I had gotten some additional information from our thought exchange. We opened it back up for several more weeks, and we'll present that information to you tonight. So again, the purpose, we're talking about 2 underutilized multi-track year-round middle schools, Pine Hollow Middle School and Rolesville Middle School. And we're going to give you some feedback today on the public engagement sessions that we had conducted and the information we collected. Again, just as a reminder, the alignment to the strategic plan, core belief number 7, strategic priority number 3, and then aims 19 and 20. As well as policy 4150, specifically operational efficiency, where this information ties directly to. And again, just from the board policy 4150, this is what it says about operational efficiency, just so we're all on the same page. So let's review what we've shared previously. So this map here shows you the 10-year forecast for our enrollment projections. Again, the arrows pointing up show projected gains in those particular areas. The larger the arrow, the more concentrated the expected gains of students. And then again, here's the projected middle school crowdings for 24-25. The areas in yellow present an area that's right around our sweet spot of 95 to 100% crowding. Orange and red tend to be overcrowded, and white is underutilized. Specifically, we're talking about 2 schools today, Pine Hollow Middle School, which is on the left of your screen in the circle, and Rolesville Middle School on the right. So some of the data that we had shared with you previously, the projected crowding for Pine Hollow Middle School with an enrollment of 795 at a capacity of 1,248 would give it a projected utilization of 63.7%. And you can see the last several years, the utilization that had been reported to DPI. And as we start to look at underutilized schools, the first thing we're going to do is look, are there any overcrowded schools in the proximate area? And as you can see here, the proximate schools, Leesville, Hillburn, West Millbrook, Carroll, and Durant Road, are not overcrowded at this time, nor projected to be. So the same for Rolesville. Again, their projected enrollment at 883 with a capacity of 1,664 gives them a projected utilization of 53.1%. And then their previously reported enrollments, and then the proximate schools in the area: Heritage, Wake Forest, Neuse River, Durant Road, and East Millbrook. Okay, so let's start talking about the public engagement. So staff contacted families living in the Pine Hollow and Rolesville Middle School base attendance areas who had children in grades 3 through 7 for the 24-25 school year. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to start to try to reach out to the families that would be affected by this particular move with their children going into school. We held virtual public engagement sessions on June 20th and June 26th. The Thought Exchange link was sent to all families, and we kept the Thought Exchange open through July 31st. So just like our student assignment webpage, here's one for calendar conversion. This is a great resource for all families looking for information about this process. We've got our presentations loaded there. We have recordings of our virtual public engagement sessions loaded there, and any other information that's pertinent to this conversation. We also have an FAQ, and here's an example of some of the FAQs that are up there. Just trying to take questions that we've received from families over time and then put them up there so that anyone new coming to the conversation can get some of their questions answered. Or if we couldn't answer questions during the sessions, we put them up there as well. So here, the question we asked was, what are some important thoughts or feelings that staff should be aware of as we consider converting the school calendar from multi-track year-round to another calendar, being track 4 only or traditional? We had 602 participants in the thought exchange. That generated 518 thoughts. There were 13,742 ratings, which averages to 22.8 ratings per participant. There were 26, the ratings ratio was 27 ratings per thought. And the alignment is low. And I'm going to explain that because you're going to see a little bit different when we talk with staff. The alignment being low means that you didn't see alignment amongst all of the thoughts and ratings. So this was, you're kind of torn. You have people who were opposed to it and people who were in favor of it. And so we used AI to generate, what was the recap of the thought exchange that we got, the information we received, and the next 2 slides represent that. There was an importance of consistency in transitional learning, stability, predictability, and routine reinforcement. In a nutshell, that's, keep us on the same calendar, keep that K-8 consistency. It's important for younger children to have that predictable schedule for them to learn appropriately. That's kind of what that one said. There were concerns about the potential impact on the enrollment percentages and the need for calendar change. There was also a preference for a traditional calendar when it talked about scheduling conflicts and aligning with your high school students. Because either way this shakes out, you have either K through 8 alignment, calendar alignment, if you keep both schools at multi-track, or if you go to traditional, you'll have 6 through 12 alignment. If you choose a track 4 only option, you will not have alignment from elementary to middle and then middle to high. The only families that would have alignment are elementary families on track 4. And so that means only 25% of your population would have that. Again, desire for alignment between middle and high school. There was concerns about the potential impact for parents in planning. A lot of that was centered around the timing of the decision. And so we've tried to really explain to parents that this is the earliest would be a 25-26 decision. Okay. So then we did some staff engagement. We went and talked to the staff at Pine Hollow and Rollsville Middle School. They were also invited to attend the virtual public info sessions. And they participated in the thought exchange as well as a Google Doc that was sent to all staff members. And the feedback we got there, we had 20 participants with 7 thoughts. There were 40 ratings, average of 6 ratings per thought. And you see the alignment is high. And again, that's expected when you're talking about multi-track year-round staff, asking them, do they prefer to stay on a multi-track year-round calendar or switch calendars? Some of the concerns we heard back from staff were raised about the potential for students to not retain material. There's this feeling that multi-track year-round tends to favor student achievement over time. That's according to staff and some parents. They highlighted the impact on elementary feeder schools, because you do have some elementary multi-track year-round feeders into these middle schools. Rollsville has less multi-track year-round schools feeding into it. It has Sanford Creek, Jones Dairy as the main feeders, and Harris Creek, whereas Pine Hollow has Sycamore Creek and Briar Creek. There's criticism of the idea of a misaligned 3 pattern when talking about multi-track year-round to elementary, then to track 4 only for middle, and traditional for high school. And there was concern about potential income loss, because as 12-month employees move to 10-month, they would lose 2 months of employment. And we'll talk more about that as well. So now going back to the public engagement. So this encompasses all, both staff and the public's feedback. These were the ratings, the star scores. Generally, anything over a 4 shows a strong preference. You didn't see a lot because, again, like I said, there was some balance in the pros and cons coming from families. But family scheduling was the highest rated one, and I wanted to break that down a little bit more to explain it. So I did took some AI and shared this with you. These were the bullet points that outline family scheduling, what that means. Again, strong preference for aligning the school calendars across different levels. Concerns about the logistics and financial challenges when you have a multi-track year-round elementary and then a traditional calendar for middle school. Often you'll hear parents say, my older children will provide as daycare providers for my younger children. There's a general sentiment that if a change is necessary, traditional calendar would be more beneficial. Some respondents also highlighted the benefits of year-round or multi-track calendar preventing student burnout. And then dissatisfaction with the perceived lack of consideration for parent opinions in the decision-making process. So here I wanted to highlight a couple of important thoughts that were rated really high. The next 2 slides will talk about the highest rated slides that we had in our thought exchange. The first one was clear communication regardless of the final decision will be critical. Changing calendars requires changing plans for vacations, track out camps, etc. And that's why staff is not recommending a change for obviously the current school year. 25-26 would be the earliest, which would give them about 12 months, a little bit less now, of making those plans for the next school year. Again, staff would not recommend making a change any earlier than 25-26. And then the second thought that was highly rated is it's extremely important to me that my children at a younger age have aligned calendars for cost and family togetherness, such as vacations. At older ages, children can stay alone, but in elementary school, middle school, I need to pay for childcare. I need calendars to align to keep costs down. Again, like I've shared with you, that is probably one of the larger responses you're going to hear from families, particularly with younger siblings in the elementary school. And just as a reminder, the reason why we can't convert the elementary schools at this point is K-3 class size legislation and having the available space within the buildings. That coupled with some projected future growth, we don't want to change a calendar now and then have to go back and change calendars in a short time period. So we're looking at a longer-term stability play for families here. And then there's another one. It wasn't rated as high, but I thought it was really impactful, so I wanted to share it with you. Wake County staff needs to share the data with families and schools to allow full transparency. We cannot just be told data says without seeing it. And so staff has tried to provide the data that we've used to make this decision, looking at the surrounding schools, looking at the history of the current schools, sharing the feedback that we're getting with families. So we're really trying to be transparent as much as possible as we can with the public so that they can see and understand the decision-making process. So another reason that we're looking at this is the estimated budget changes. So on the last slide, we talked about the teaching positions that had been provided to the school. So when a school is underutilized, it does not earn as many teaching positions as it may need to run its core classes. And so the school district needs to then provide those months of employment to the school so that they can run that. Or they're taking their specials MOEs and maybe not offering a dance or an art program so that they can run their core classes. And so that coupled with the estimated budget changes in moving schools from a multi-track year-round to traditional are 2 major factors why staff is making a recommendation to move away from multi-track, since we can't fill it to the level where it's going to earn all the teaching positions. So here you can see the categories here on the left-hand side show the positions, and then for each of the 2 schools, Pine Hollow Middle and Rolesville Middle, and then that would be the months of employment change for those schools. So in essence, you'd have 35.5 less months of employment allotted to Pine Hollow Middle, and then same for Rolesville Middle, which equates to over the course of $545,000. Okay, and this is to just not run the schools on a multi-track. Again, these would be staff positions that would be cut, so just to be very clear with you about that impact. So next steps. So based on the information provided, staff does not recommend to continue to operate Pine Hollow Middle School and Rollsville Middle School on the multi-track year-round calendar. A conversion to the traditional calendar is recommended based on the following factors. Long-term stability for families. While changing school calendars is impactful to families, and we clearly understand that. Providing continuity for grades 6 through 12 will provide more long-term stability for families. Changing a school to track 4 only at the middle school when you have multi-track year-round feeders at elementary and traditional high school would not provide stability for families long-term. It's also very difficult for principals to try to align calendars as much as they can at the elementary level with middle school. And then you're talking about shifting students, a lot of animosity towards the staff if they can't approve all of those requests. So it just becomes very troublesome. So that's why we feel long-term for stability for families, a traditional calendar at the middle school would be best. The projected available capacity for growth. So historically, we've converted schools from a multi-track to track 4 only. This would be the first time that we would be converting a multi-track year-round school to a traditional calendar. Again, I think the circumstances surrounding the data, the financial costs, prove to me that this would be the recommendation that we would make. The new growth that could come in these particular areas, as you saw with the slides and the proximate schools and their crowding, that could be absorbed by surrounding schools. So we could look at reassignments in the areas to help with the new growth that's coming. So we're seeking a board vote this evening or at a later date, but staff would recommend the board to vote to change Pine Hollow Middle School and Rollsville Middle School to the traditional calendar. And I'll open it up to questions.
All right, thank you for the presentation. I know that I've certainly heard a lot about this issue with Pine Hollow being in District 7. I don't know about other board members, which you may have heard. I'll open it up to other questions before I start going through my list. Ms. Evans?
Do you know what data that parents are saying they're not seeing? Because in my mind, your maps and the enrollment capacities at the surrounding schools, I'm just curious what other data.
I'm not clear, and that's why we really tried to be as transparent as possible and put it up there. We created the website as well in case parents missed the virtual public engagement sessions or hadn't seen these slide decks. We're trying to put them out there as much as possible.
And then, Chair Haverty, my only other question, and it can, as we discuss, I want to hear what you've heard and what Ms. Caulfield has heard, as far as what you're hearing from your constituents about the change. But that's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from any other board members? Ms. Mahaffey?
I was just curious, and if I forgot that this was the previous one, please just let me know. I can go back and look there. It says the projected enrollment for this school year for Pine Hollow and Rollsville, that's at the current multi-track capacity. Do we know what that would be if just for this year? I realize looking next year is hard, but what traditional?
So that traditional Rollsville Middle would have a utilization about 70%.
Okay.
And then I think it would be 75% for Pine Hollow.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from any other board members? Dr. A and Ms. Caulfield?
Just to verify, there's no cost difference between the track 4 versus traditional in terms of
No, so the ADM that we would be able to provide, you're putting them all on the same track so you can move the students amongst the classrooms on that one track. The issues that you have with multi-track is that it's not easy to move a student from track 1 to track 4 just to fill a classroom, right? It's not stable for families. And then obviously traditional, same thing. But yeah, you wouldn't have, it would be the same cost.
All right, Ms. Caulfield?
So the data that they were asking for, I know that you have percentages and I see the maps. Were they asking for like the specific numbers? I know that like when we showed what the capacity is and how many we had, I think sometimes that delivers a real good message of you're either at capacity. I think that still there's a lot of families that don't understand the difference between capacity and capped. And even, when we meet with, some leadership people and we show them the numbers and they see the actual charts, were they provided that in?
We
any of the
didn't provide
responses?
the actual capacity changes, but I can share them with you now. So when you go to Pine Hollow Middle School, so their current capacity is 1248 as a multi-track. They would be at 936 as traditional. So then you're looking at, 795 students in a 936, 795 divided by 936.
And if I do remember in that presentation, you did explain
We did,
what
yeah.
that
During the
was.
virtual public sessions, we talked about it, but we did not have it written out.
Yeah.
And then for Rollsville Middle School, at a capacity of 1664 as traditional or single track would be 1248.
And then my other, I guess, question of clarity, whichever, it seems like it's kind of down the line whether families wanted to switch to traditional or track 4. You really didn't have one sway or the other.
Yeah, there was, from the public engagement side, parents, not staff, there was low alignment. So it went either way. A lot of it is if you've got middle school, older elementary students or current middle school students, you're preferring to align with the high school because you're going to have that long-term stability. But young families, families with just elementary kids or maybe elementary and middle do prefer the KE alignment.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? All right, so I've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of parents about this, and this is also why I'd asked for additional time when we met about this before, to make sure that people were informed about it and had an opportunity to have their questions asked. And I really appreciate the time that the staff, Mr. Carrozza, Ms. Pulliam, and others have put into answering questions, to meeting with families to talk to them about it. Some of the questions, Ms. Edmonds, you'd asked about the data. When you have a decision that could potentially, we'll say, destabilize like a family's calendar, they're always looking for alternatives or things that they might be able to do. And so I had a lot of requests for specific information. I don't think it was anything hidden. They were requests for information about possible alternatives that when staff vetted them, they might not have added up, but if you were just in the public, you might have wondered about. For example, did you consider this new development that's going in? There's a new development going in right next to Sycamore Creek Elementary School. So how many families would that add? And would that increase the Pine Hollow enrollment, because that's in the Pine Hollow area? So we've had questions about whether we considered specific new developments coming in. I know there's also questions about other school assignment areas. So for example, we recently converted Pleasant Grove Elementary from traditional to year-round. And the thought was, well, those are more year-round students. Could they go to Pine Hollow and increase those numbers? But the students that are now in Pleasant Grove are students that live further west in Morrisville and in West Cary. And so that would be a much further commute than if it had been the students that had been previously assigned to Pine Hollow. So those are the kind of requests that I'm getting that seem data-related. I don't know if there's other specific things, so I appreciate your question. And if someone does have, who might be out there in the public, a more specific question we haven't addressed, of course, we can address that. We know we represent the whole county, but we also know we represent those families that vote in our districts and represent us. And so we listen to everybody, but sometimes we listen a little more attentively to those in our neighborhood. And, so I've really made it a point to try to go out and explore some of these alternatives. I think one of the most compelling things that staff has presented is when you see the cost. And the cost to the whole district of over $500,000 to keep both of these schools on these calendars when they can't keep them filled. And even though they couldn't track all of the costs, you can see even some of the costs they couldn't track would be additional expenses. For example, if you're serving the same number of students in your child nutrition program, and you're serving the same number of meals, but you're serving them over 10 months versus 12 months, you know, you're paying more staff to be there more often. And so we know how stressed, for example, the child nutrition program is, and so I'm sure there's additional savings. You know, as a district, it seems like it's been, I won't say always, but our recent policy has been to try to align K-5 calendars with 6 through 8 to get that K-8 calendar alignment as often as we can. And that's something I really support. You know, yes, you can get 6 through 12 alignment, but generally when you have younger kids, I think, that have older siblings, you know, you want to try to keep those younger kids on the same calendar with the older kids for as long as you can. And so I appreciate that's been our approach, and I recognize that this destabilizes that. I've tried to look at some other options, and I wanted to ask about a couple of them. One of the things we looked at were the feeder schools, and is this a situation that could be addressed through reassignment? Now, looking at the Pine Hollow middle schools, we saw that Sycamore Creek is a feeder school that's on year-round. Briar Creek is a feeder school that's on year-round. However, I also saw that we had Barton Pond students that are on a traditional calendar that are going to Pine Hollow. And I didn't know in terms of the whole enrollment, but we already have some students now in that assignment area that are getting a mismatched calendar. Is that right?
York and Lynn Road. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So we have York and Lynn Road students that are also attending Pine Hollow that are only getting, they're on K-5 traditional, 6-8 year-round, and then 6-12 traditional. And so that's very destabilizing. What about Pleasant Union? Because Pleasant Union is a proximate elementary school, and I believe it feeds to West Millbrook. I know that when you show the feeder schools up there, if you can get you to advance to that slide, none of those schools have a very high enrollment and none are overcrowded, but West Millbrook has about twice as many kids, it looks like, as Leesville, Hilburn, and some of those others. Is this something that reassignment or a partial reassignment out of Pleasant Union to Pine Hollow could address that?
So I'll say this, as you look long-term, right? Pleasant Union, I don't have strong indications that they'll be able to remain on multi-track long-term. So assigning Pleasant Union to Pine Hollow for the sake of keeping a multi-track year-round at the middle school, when you're running the risk of then possibly changing the calendar for Pleasant Union, I'm not sure that that's something we would want to do long-term. We have looked at a lot of, reassignment being the first, because obviously calendar changes are always the most difficult. Historically, they've been our last resort, and it continues to be our last resort. And so we have looked at other options and trying to find ways to increase the base. But I think when you look at the map, let me see here, let me go back. When you look at this map, I mean, all of the areas in white are below 95% crowded. And so you have very few areas where your yellow sweet spot, right where you're supposed to be, 90, I think it's like 90 to 100 there. That's right in your sweet spot. But you have very few schools that are overcrowded, and the majority at our middle school level is underutilized. We have enough seats. This is a prime opportunity for us to start now looking at mobile classrooms and starting to move those off of campuses so we can bring that back down. We just have an excess of seats. So I don't think that a reassignment is in our best interest long term. Well, I know it's really impactful for families now and they really enjoy the calendar. I just don't foresee multi-track in our non-high growth areas remaining at the middle school level long term.
I have just a couple more questions that parents have brought to me and that they did want to get a staff response from, so.
And just a reminder for West Millbrook, it is one of the magnet schools, so a portion of that population is not from the base attendance area. They're coming in through magnet application, so it's not quite as crowded as it looks if you were to take those schools out. It would be closer to the 78-80% crowding without those applications.
Thank you for sharing that.
And so then, well, that actually opens up another question, which is if it's a popular magnet program, would any reassignment open up more seats for more families to be able to attend, potentially, but I don't know specifically what the percentage fill rate is for the magnet seats versus the base seats.
Yeah, they don't have a significant wait list of priority applicants, so that wouldn't be something we would offer up at this time.
All right, just a couple more of the questions that I've gotten. If you can go back to the Pine Hollow slide with the neighboring middle schools. You see Pine Hollow at 63.7%. You also see Durant Road there at an even lower percentage. And so a question that I've gotten is, why is Durant Road remaining multi-track?
They're track 4 only.
They're track 4 only.
We converted them several years ago, along with their elementary feeders.
And so then, let's see, I guess the biggest question that I had from 2 weeks ago as parents and families looked at this, do we know why our middle schools are so under-enrolled? This isn't a situation of we have schools with maybe some additional capacity where, we don't want them to be at 95% capacity. If they were all at 85 to 90%, that would be one thing. But you're seeing many of these schools that are under 60%, some in the 50s. But we know that our elementary enrollments are much higher, and our high school enrollments by percentage are much higher. What's going on with our middle schools?
So 2 things. You've got mobile classrooms on these campuses that may make them seem a little bit more less crowded than they really are, right? I know Leesville has at least 10 trailers on their campus. So seeing that still doesn't make them overcrowded if you take all of the classrooms off. You've also got a history of declining birth rate, nationally and actually globally. And so you're starting to see a lot of that catch up over time. A lot of the kids, pre-COVID are going to be going into middle school soon. So we're seeing that decline. Now, our area has picked up with live birth rates, but you're still not seeing that project just yet into students longer term. It's going to take a little bit more time. And then loss of market share, private charter homeschool has made our cohorts a little bit smaller. So our projections from 20 years ago, that we're finally catching up, you're not getting the same market share that you had once got. And so that's just something longer term to consider.
Yet many of the students return for high school, which is why then the high school percentages are much higher. Okay.
I think that's becoming harder and harder for us to project because you've got students who are never showing up K through 8 and then walking in the door for 9th grade, and now we need to, make accommodations for them. So,
Well, I guess my last question with it then is, we've heard from staff and we've heard from families that both feel that a conversion would be destabilizing for them. But specifically for families, several have asked if we make the move to convert the middle school to a traditional calendar, would we consider, and you touched on this, converting the elementary calendars. Now, you said with Pleasant Union, you didn't think the growth supported Pleasant Union's future as a multi-track year-round, but we've also talked about the K-3 class size. So how do we reconcile those? Prior Creek, for example, had been under-enrolled until a recent reassignment. Sycamore Creek had been capped, but has a lower enrollment with opening of Barton Pond. Is there a way that we could put those families those elementary school families, onto a traditional calendar a few years from now? Again, it might mean some tweaking with some of those reassignments, especially the Barton Pond opening, but if it led to more calendar flexibility, is that something we would look at?
So certainly, yes. I think the goal is we don't want to have misaligned calendars. I mean, that's definitely not our goal. Again, K-3 class size legislation forces us to meet it at the elementary level for now. But in areas where we're not seeing long-term growth, we're eventually going to be able to start scaling that back. And so that will be something we can look at. We can accelerate that plan if you're willing to look at reassignments in the areas. We can certainly look at that and look at scenarios and present those to you. But that would be the long-term goal, is to, if we don't need multi-track year-round for capacity purposes, that we not continue to operate on that calendar because of the additional costs.
Okay. So then, as we go forward with the reassignment plan for this fall, it's the reassignment for the 25-26 year. As we have community conversations, could we go into some of these neighborhoods and specifically ask some of those year-round elementary school families what they might think about conversion, or at the very least, open up a thought exchange for them?
I would like to separate it from the assignment because they have a very heavy lift in opening 4 new schools this year, but we can certainly do outreach, continued, running concurrently with staff and getting out to these neighborhoods and continuing to collect feedback. We can certainly do that.
I appreciate that we're trying to project this out, but that is the biggest complaint that we'll get, is not necessarily that a change has to be made, but people feeling like it's very sudden, that they didn't have notice. And so the more that we can get some of these conversations about the elementary schools going early, get that feedback, find out where people are going, the more we won't have to try to collect that information in a short time later. All right. I know that was a lot of questions. I appreciate all of you accommodating me and letting me get those questions out. Thanks. Mr. Hershey?
So this is not a question for staff, but for Chair Haggerty and Ms. Caulfield. Do you all have a preference on when you'd like this to come before us and vote? Because I know they asked potentially today, or it could be down the line, and just so the rest of us are kind of prepared.
I know Ms. Caulfield had her hand up. I'll let her.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, as far as like getting feedback, I've kind of really gotten limited response, but it's kind of one that says yes, one says no. That's why I was asking him earlier, like in general, what his feel was. I do have 2 quick questions though. Are there trailers on Pine Hollow and Roseville Middle? I don't think Roseville Middle has.
I do not believe so, but we can have a staff member just check real quick.
There are no trailers at Pine Hollow.
I don't think there's any.
There are no trailers at Roseville Middle.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think they had them at Roseville Middle. So the growth that's coming, especially like up in the whole Wake Forest area, I know that's very close to Roseville Middle School. I'm assuming that all of those numbers have been part of this decision because, I mean, we just see them popping up, and when you look at all of that, you know it's coming down the road. So just for the public to understand, that has been taken into consideration.
Yeah. When you look at the available seats, I think when I last counted it, there was upwards of 800 available seats for that growth over the next 10 years, based on our current projections, based on our current utilizations.
Okay, thank you.
Pine Hollow area, yeah, I mean, there's less area for growth up in that area because it's in the water. But the Rollsville area is continuing to grow.
So just in response to Mr. Hershey, staff was gracious, I thought, in delaying this 2 or 3 weeks for us to give us some time for some more input. We've tried to use that time to look at alternatives, to get more opinion. I know that a lot of my families and neighborhoods around me are going to be unhappy about this. I don't know that if we delay it 2 weeks, there'll be any new solution that will make them less unhappy about it. I think when you look at the numbers about what it costs the district, it's just so hard to justify spending that much more money for these 2 middle schools when we have so many other needs in the district. And what I'd like to see, rather than delaying this and still maybe voting the same way a couple weeks from now, that we take some time to plan to hear from some of those year-round elementary school families and figure out the best plan for that going forward. I think these conversions are probably inevitable. I think the sooner we know now what we're going to do, the more time staff will have for transitions that they may want to make, and the more that we can look at those elementary school questions. I will say, and I don't know if anyone else had a question about this, they talked about conversion to a traditional calendar, and they talked about conversion to a track 4 calendar. The one thing that I think has been pretty consistent for most of the people that I talked to is that if you're going to make the change, go ahead and change to traditional, because you get more misalignment with the track 4 only. And you might have some families on a multi-track calendar with siblings in middle school that will line up, but most of them won't. And so they'll still have that misalignment anyway, and then you create more misalignment with students than siblings in high school. So, and then where you have the traditional calendar students that are already assigned to the school, to say for Pine Hollow, this at least gets those families on the same calendar versus some being on traditional and some on a track four. So I would say if we do this, we should go ahead with traditional. Ms. Mahaffey?
I agree with that. I think when Mr. Croza referenced that historically we've moved middle schools to track four, I'm thinking most recently Westlake, all of those feeders were also going from multi-track to track four, so you did have that natural alignment. Whereas I think at least we can guarantee the 6-8 alignment for our elementary families that are in a year-round situation versus having to ping between 3 different calendars.
I think that's a very good point. Ms. Caulfield?
I want to add for Roseville Middle School, Roseville Elementary School is traditional, Roseville Middle School is year-round, and then you go to high school. So some of the Roseville residents, they may actually, this may help them for elementary and middle school alignment. I mean, we still do have Sanford Creek and Harris Creek are very close, and they are year-round. So it's still leaving the line kind of vague with, it's not really tipping one way or another. But Roseville Elementary School is traditional as it stands.
Dr.
And this is not so much a question but a comment, but I mean, is there or could be some unintended consequence of having a traditional that people may want to go to a traditional, as opposed to staying at the school where they are at a year-round school? I mean, that's it.
So you mean families change, so going back to base if they were on a year-round? Yeah, we've looked at those numbers as well. So when you have a situation like this, so you've got families who've put in a calendar application to attend a multi-track year-round school that may not be leaving their traditional middle school to go to a multi-track year-round, those students would then be assigned back to their base school because it's on the same calendar now. So you'll see that with Pine Hollow and particularly Leesville, and with Rollsville and Wake Forest. So there will be families switching back to their base schools. Now, if families want to stay, we'll certainly have generous stability rules, obviously without district transportation provided, but we will certainly allow families to remain assigned to their schools.
All right, any other questions? All right, so then what I'm guessing from the comments we've received, this will come up tonight on the agenda?
It is, yeah.
All right. And then we'll have any more discussion. If there's anything between now and then that you think of that you'd like to ask or like to discuss, we can discuss it then. All right, thank you. The next item up on our agenda, budget reconciliation recommendations. And we'll hear from Mr. Nieder and Ms. Kimsian. Go right ahead, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Haggerty, board members. Today, we are going to present to you recommendations to reconcile the board's 2024-2025 operating budget. Give you a little background first of what has led us up to today, then review the actual recommendations with you, and then discuss next steps with you. So going back to early May, on May 7th at your board meeting, you approved the board's proposed budget for 24-25, and included in that proposed budget was a request of the county for an increase of local county appropriation in the amount of $63.2 million. The commissioners went through their budgeting process, finalized their budget in early June, and while their final budget did provide a significant increase to the school board to the tune of $58.3 million, it didn't quite get to the full amount of what was requested in the board's proposed budget. So based upon that, there's just under a $4.9 million gap that needs to be reconciled. And by late June, the state had still not made any decisions about finalizing its budget for the current year. So we asked the board to approve, and you did, an interim budget resolution to allow the district to continue to operate. Then on June 28th, the House and the Senate approved what's known as Senate Bill 332, and it was signed into law by Governor Cooper 10 days later, and it approved what was in the second year of the biennial budget, state biennial budget, as it relates to compensation changes for school system employees. And you'll hear more detail about those in a separate presentation that follows this presentation. So they approved that. There were no other decisions made in Senate Bill 332 that had an impact on local funding that would be required for the current year. And at this point, we do not anticipate that the legislature will take any additional action that will have implications for the board's budget as we look forward. So that's perhaps a long-winded way to get to the point and say we now are prepared to ask the board to consider reconciling the budget to available funding and reconciling it back to what was in the proposed budget. And at this point, there's that $4.9 million gap. Your board's proposed budget included two sets of compensation change recommendations. First, it included all of the things that were in the state legislated second year, the biennial budget. But then in addition, the board approved locally funded compensation changes above and beyond what the state put in their legislation. For example, in the board's proposed budget, bus drivers were recommended to be brought to a minimum hourly rate of $20 per hour. And for classified staff other than bus drivers, the minimum hourly rate would be brought from $17, which it was in this past year, to $17.75, or a 4% minimum increase. And that was above and beyond what was in the state proposed budget. So it was apparent to staff that compensation was a priority area, staff compensation, to the board. And so our reconciliation recommendations protect all compensation changes that are in the board's proposed budget. None of them have an impact on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Senior Director of Budget, Terry Kimsey, and she's going to walk through, I think there is 4 or 5 different recommendations.
Good afternoon. The first one is an adjustment of $103,147. Hilltop Needmore Elementary will open in 2026-27 rather than 2025-26. So we are able to defer the cost that we needed for the early hire for the principal and the lead secretary and task assignment dollars. The second adjustment is in our early college programming. We included $750,000 in the board's budget for costs that might be needed as the Wake Young Women's and Wake Young Men's Leadership Academies transition to a new partner at the university and college level. We were not certain if the state would continue supporting the schools with early college funding. House Bill 900 has now been approved, and the state will continue supporting both of those schools with that $180,000 per school for next year. So we're able to reduce the local budget by $360,000 that we had budgeted as a contingency if it was needed. That will leave $390,000 in the budget if there are additional costs needed for the transition. If we do not need those funds, they would be freed up as we get into the year. The next adjustment is in the area of transportation. The Department of Public Instruction provided an allotment adjustment to Wake County School System in June for over $2 million. It was very late in the fiscal year. We were able to recode local costs to utilize that state funding so that we did not revert any of the dollars to the state. But those recurring base budget dollars in the local budget still remain. So we're able to reduce the local budget for transportation by $2.4 million. It will not impact any of our transportation operations or on our ability to recruit and retain. The next adjustment is also in the area of transportation. The cost to increase our bus drivers to the $20 minimum per hour that was included in your budget was about $1.1 million. As we've analyzed spending for last year in transportation, there were some recurring base budget dollars that were used for some one-time cost. Therefore, we can afford the cost to adjust to $20 minimum per hour within the existing transportation budget. So we do not need to add the local funds of $1.1 million after we've analyzed everything now that we've closed out last fiscal year. The last adjustment, which would be an adjustment of $900,000, is in the area of our restart schools. We currently have 40 schools now in the restart program with that status. We have centralized the budget for the current year, and our area superintendents work closely with the principals, and as the principals have needs that beyond formula for either staffing or professional development dollars or dollars for supplies and materials and other things, they are able to access funds that will potentially lapse in our vacant positions in those schools. So across the 40 schools, we estimate there will be about $8 million that could lapse in salaries and benefits due to vacancies that occur or pre-tax savings plans. This adjustment of $900,000 would allow the area superintendents and those principals to access $7.2 million of that potential lapse for things that are needed beyond formula. To provide context for that, we reviewed the last 4 years, and there's been an utilization of approximately $5.2 million over the last 4 years, an average. Last year was about $4.9 million. So we do feel that making this $900,000 adjustment, it does not impact anything already allotted to the schools. We don't think it will impact the decisions the area superintendents make with their schools for resources needed. This is an area we will closely monitor as the year progresses, and if at any point we lapse or have savings greater than the $8 million, we would be able to reinstate some of this $900,000 adjustment for them to use for those schools. The next slide is a summary of these 4 things. So this just shows the adjustment to the early hires for the delayed opening of Hilltop Nemore Elementary, the early college programming adjustment, the 2 transportation adjustments, and the restart adjustment. And the sum of those 4 areas, does total the $4.8 million needed to reconcile to the approved county appropriation for this fiscal year.
And then just one more slide, and then we can open it up to any questions. Normally, we do not like to ask the board to take action on something on the same day or evening that they are hearing it. We're going to ask the board to consider making an exception if they are supportive of these recommendations, and it's solely for a timing matter. If the board is in a position to support these recommendations tonight and they are able to approve them tonight, the timing will allow us, and assuming the board would then approve tonight the salary schedule recommendations, which is basically what's in the board's proposed budget. If that were to happen tonight, we would be able to include the compensation changes in the August payroll. However, if the board directs the superintendent and staff to make revisions to these recommendations, we certainly will. We would bring any revisions back to your August 20th meeting, and then the only change would be the compensation changes would be reflected in the September payroll. And again, as in all prior years, the compensation changes become effective July 1st of this year, so there would be retroactive pay to make employees whole. And if the board does approve this tonight, the compensation changes would go into place on the August payroll, and the retroactive pay would be paid on the September payroll. If we are directed to make some changes to the budget reconciliation recommendations, and we bring those back on the 20th of August, the September payroll would then include both the compensation changes and the retroactive pay. And that's what we have for you. Be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nieder, Ms. Kinsey. We'll go ahead and just say that I do support bringing this up tonight if everyone's in agreement with it, just because getting that compensation, those paychecks into the hands of our workers and our staff, this month versus September, I think can make a real difference. And I've heard from a lot of our staff about that. So we'll start off with Mr. Swanson.
Thank you. I also wanted to say thank you as well for the thoughtfulness that went into this. I'm also in support of this. Looking forward to voting for this tonight. I just have a statement, rather. I also want to just applaud the team and for shifting those restart budgets to the central office, so it's taking the burden off of the lead secretary and the principals, so they can focus on the teaching and learning versus being inundated with other things. So hopefully this can also lead to some of that burnout that we see or turnovers in those two positions. So thank you, and hope it'll help.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest advantages of centralizing the budget. So we're really hoping that helps also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Ms. Evans? And Ms. Mahaffey?
Can we please get this whole slide deck would be great, but slide 12 in particular shows all of the summary of this. And could we please get a copy of this?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. I want to echo what Mr. Swanson said about the restart piece. I think that is pivotal, especially because many of them are also dealing with Title I funding as well. And I just wanted to raise the question to the superintendent and the chair. We talked almost this time last year about twice monthly pay for non-certified staff, and I was just curious, since we're talking about salaries and budgets and what have you, if we can expect an update on that soon.
And that is something that Mr. Nieder and I talked about, but can you update the rest of the board on?
Yes, be glad to. We are still on track and I'm going to look at our Chief Technology Officer to make sure I'm not misstating anything or misunderstanding. Still on track to go live with our first group in January, and that first group would be our bus drivers and our school-based child nutrition staff. We would let them be paid twice a month, and I think it was for a period of 2 or 3 months to work out any kinks, and then we would look at bringing the other classified staff and other staff that are eligible to be paid twice a month online. And just a reminder for the board, state law precludes us from paying our certified staff anything other than monthly.
Thank you.
Thank you. And in terms of similar updates, Mr. Hershey had a...
First, thanks for the work. Excellent job. Since we're doing updates, is there anything on the market pay study or the organizational structure study where we've made any progress in finding somebody or?
The RFP has been released.
Okay.
for the market study on compensation levels. And as soon as we get all the proposals back, we'll be in a position, I think, to provide you better information about the specific question about did we get some good responses. But that's out. We've begun drafting the RFP for the organizational study. That is far less complex, and I think we're maybe a week or so away from finishing that up and putting it on the street as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate those updates.
All right. Ms. Caulfield and Dr. In?
I appreciate all the adjustments that were made, and meanwhile, keeping all of the things that were really on our must-have and bucket list. So I'm glad that that actually is working out. I have a question in regards to, since we're talking about budget and pay, and I know that we're already starting to get into the next year. I have spoken with Granville County, actually, and they went about budgeting a little bit differently, and they did a zero balance budgeting. Wanted to know if that was something that we could consider doing going forward.
We have,
So I'll respond to that. That's one of the things that many of the department heads and chiefs are doing with their staff, is looking at zero-based budgeting. So they look at what they need as opposed to saying, we have this amount, we're going to figure out how we spend it all. And so that is part of what is now happening with staff, which is where the majority of the budget type activity is going to take place. That certainly will be a part of the bigger budget that we do, but I'll let you add to that, David.
yeah, and I would just layer on top of that, that much, probably most of the funding we receive from the state, which is the majority of our budget, comes with explicit instructions about how it's to be allotted out and used. So it's really the other areas like local funding where we have flexibility that could have implications. When I say implications, positive implications of kind of re-leveling and resetting that a zero-based budget curve brings about.
Yeah, I mean, speaking with them, I mean, obviously they're on a much smaller scale. We're not talking, I think it's like 6,400 students that they have, and a $72 million budget or something like that. And with doing that, they saved $1 million, projected $2 million for next year. A lot of it is actually through programs, like eliminating, some of the waste that they had, or things that weren't really being utilized, or giving us exactly what we were hoping it would give. Rather than saying, oh, let's clean shop, it's really just kind of evaluating what we have. So I was hoping that we could lean more in that direction so that we don't have to squeeze, some of the areas and then we can give more to HVAC issues and certain things.
And so I'm glad that you asked that question, and that is what we will be doing over the next 8 months as we go into the next budget cycle. We know we'll be bringing that in the January, February timeframe, but we have absolutely made that a part of our schedule, being able to look at the budget, eliminate the areas where there's excess, eliminate areas of duplication. And so the things that you're talking about is what we planned out, so that when we get into the next budget cycle, we're already there. I will go back to, just to add to what David said, that the majority of that state funding that we get is going to be categorical, and a lot of that goes to positions, so you don't have that much flexibility. But you do have it with your local funding. There is some state funding, such as DSSF and things of that nature, where you will have flexibility. And so we look at those portions where we have that ability. I absolutely believe there's a lot that we can save in the budget. And so we'll have an opportunity to talk more with the board about that. But for me as superintendent, my biggest concern is how we create those kind of savings, and knowing where we have to be with our fund balance and the danger zone that we don't want to get into. And so that is, I think, one of the biggest priorities over the next 6 months, so that when we talk budget in January, February, we're going to be in a solid position.
Awesome, that's great. And with the organizational study that we're doing, will we have the completed organizational chart?
I'm sorry?
So with the organizational study, will
yeah.
we have that?
Well, what I will say is that we have a complete organizational chart now, but any changes that I make will be reflected based on the study and what I've also discussed with chiefs, if you will. And so regardless of which direction we go, the organizational chart will reflect that. If there's a more or less detailed org chart that you need now, just let me know, and we'll still make that available to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Ing?
Yeah, thanks so much for putting this together. And I was kind of dreading this conversation for a long time because we had talked about how are we going to deal with this shortfall, and do we have to give up some of the programs that we had talked about that really help with the schools, like the substitutes and all that. So I'm glad that we didn't have to resort to that. Now, the question that I do have with that transportation funding piece, the $2.4 million. So was that something that was not accounted for in the initial budget? I was trying to figure out how that money happened to come up, now that, whereas before it wasn't there.
It was a fortuitous, well, let me back up and say this is perhaps a good example of just the fact that we start developing a budget in the fall of the prior year, and we can only do the basis based on what we know has occurred historically. If the state's made a decision about what's going to take place in next year, let's say in a second-year biennial budget, we had no idea that we would receive this additional allotment from the state in June. And so it was fortuitous. So I don't want to call it a wash, but it kind of, we got additional state funding, which means we could free up local funding.
Sure.
And we didn't know that until the board had approved their budget, which was in early May. And as Terry said, we did have enough time to recode things, so we didn't let that money for the past fiscal year revert back to the state, but it will now be in our state-based budget.
So is this a one-time or is it recurring?
There's some changes in how the state is releasing resources to school systems. So more than a year ago, transportation was always difficult for us because the state would release to us about 60 to 80% of our budget, maybe it was 80% at the beginning of the year. And they would not release or even let us know the amount of the remainder of the budget until December. And then periodically through the year, there would be some other adjustments for fuel or stop arm cost or some other small adjustments. There was legislation last year that said the state had to release more of that at the front of the year because a lot of school districts were having a really hard time even knowing how to budget local funds for transportation, not knowing what we were going to see. So last year, we got more of our state allotment at the start of the year, which was better. That was great. And then there were a few minor adjustments through the year. But to get this large of an adjustment in June, after all the spending deadlines were passed, it almost makes the funds ineffective. I mean, luckily, we could recode things we had already spent. But to get the allotment that late was unexpected at that dollar value and at that timing. So they do recalculate transportation every year based on many criteria. But looking at what we have been utilizing our transportation budget and the best we can read the tea leaves and all of the information they've given us and looking at our spending, we're comfortable with these adjustments and feel we can still maintain all of our services and pay within existing funds that we have from state and local.
So you're saying that we may not expect to have that same amount at that time of the year next year?
So what I would say to that is that because they've redone how the funding is released to districts for transportation, I can't say that I would anticipate this happening next year because I know this is their first cycle going through that. We certainly appreciate it. Part of what has to happen at the state is looking at fuel prices. That's probably the biggest thing that they want to make sure that they have a reserve for. I think fuel prices have been somewhat stable over the last 2 or 3 years, so that's not a problem. So luckily for us, this release allowed us to free up local dollars. Most school districts are going to spend some level of funding out of local funds to support transportation, but luckily we're in a position where we can make the change. I really don't think it'll be the same next year since they've now gone through this first cycle, but we may get the same gift next year.
Any other questions for Mr. Nader and Ms. Kinsey? All right, then we'll see this on the action agenda tonight as well. All right, thank you.
I'm just going to change the PowerPoint.
Change out the PowerPoint, but we will keep our speakers. We'll add Dr. Mattillo if he's here. The next item will be the salary schedules for our 2024-2025 school year.
And actually, Dr. Mattillo is on a well-deserved vacation in the Adirondack Mountains, literally without any connectivity. So he couldn't join us right now if he wanted to.
Just thankful it wasn't Florida today, so.
Yeah.
Well deserved.
The next thing we'd like to do is review with you the recommended 2024-2025 salary schedules. As I shared in the prior presentation, what's represented in these schedules are all the increases for the new year that were either legislated by the state and those changes that the board approved using local funding that went above and beyond what the state legislated. So we're just going to go through, it's not too many slides, category by category of employee, and the actual schedules themselves are in the backup materials in Assembly. We're not going to go through the schedules themselves, but if you're curious, they're all there. I do want to point out to the board members, just this afternoon we found a couple typos, and the typos are not related to the actual compensation amounts. But the typos, there's one on page 7, one on page 34, and one on page 35. Everything in this book should say year 2024-2025. We use a prior year's book as the base for developing a next year's book. We missed 3 spots. So there are 3 typos on those pages, one on each page. On page 7, instead of saying 2024-2025, it says 2024-2024. And on pages 34 and 35, instead of saying 2024-2025, it still says 2023-2024. We're going to get those typos corrected before they get posted, but the actual dollar amounts are all accurate. So certified staff received a legislative change, and it averaged across all steps 3%. And then above and and they also got a step increase. And above and beyond that, the board approved a 4% increase to the salary supplement amount. And we've included in here, this is the teacher Schedule A, so this represents a teacher with just a bachelor's degree and no advanced certifications. And you can see on the left-hand side of this page, it goes from step 0 to 15, and on the right-hand, step 16 through 30. And in each of those 2 charts, it shows the state base salary and local supplement from the past year. It then shows what it is in the current year. And then, and these are monthly amounts, but then it annualizes it. And then it shows the percentage increase from the state and the supplement. And the supplement amounts aren't just 4% going all the way down, because you have to, if a teacher was on step 0 last year, they'll be on step 1 this year. And so our step amounts change as you go up. So that's why it's not a 4% increase. In many cases, well, in all cases, I believe it's more than 4%. In many cases, significantly more than 4%. The other schedules for certified staff are all in that book, and would look similar to this, obviously just with different amounts. I want to remind that the board approved a year ago reinstating the payment of a 10% compensation differential for our certified staff with a master's degree that were not grandfathered. Back in 2013, the state, well, prior to 2013, the state used to provide that 10% differential. They changed it. They said in 2013, if you already have your master's in a relevant field and you're getting this differential pay, you'll continue to receive it. They also said that if you're already enrolled in a program and you've begun your coursework, when you graduate, you'll be eligible for it from the state. That any other teachers that had not begun a program would not be receiving it. So the action taken by the board a year ago basically utilized local funding to reinstate that 10% differential for all of our certified staff with master's degrees, and that will continue into the coming year, and it's the intention to continue that into the future. I'll also point out that, and you may recall, I think this came out during the budget, some of the early budget development work, that will become an increasing cost over time as the grandfathered teachers eventually retire, and the teachers coming in are not, so that will put pressure on the local budget as well over time. School principals receive an overall 3% compensation increase. That was legislated by the state. Assistant principals receive a 19% differential over the teacher Schedule A, and that differential is how they've been paid for years. So effectively, with that teacher Schedule A going up, as you saw a few slides back, 19% gets added to that, and that becomes the increase effectively for assistant principals. Classified staff, these are our, what we call our graded positions. Everything from child nutrition workers, front office staff in the schools, data managers, many of the central office staff received a 3% state legislated increase. But then the board went much further and said, we want to raise the minimum hourly rate from the current $17 per hour, which was this past year, to $17.75 per hour, or at least a 4% increase. And that is reflected in these schedules, as well as continuing to maintain step and grade differentials so we don't inflict salary compression or hourly rate compression into the schedules, which would be just kicking a problem down the road. Bus drivers as well received the state legislated increase. And again, the board has in its proposed budget, and these salary schedules reflect a $20 per hour minimum starting rate for bus drivers. Again, that too will be retroactive to July 1. So any bus drivers that were in place July 1, even though they may not have been getting paid that $20 an hour minimum, will get a retroactive amount to bring them up.
Ms. Evans?
Sorry, do you mind if I just interject? You talking about the retroactive, but that's for everything we're discussing, right?
Yes.
Not just bus drivers?
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct,
thank
Ms.
you.
Evans. Yes.
Thank you.
And then administrator banded positions, technology banded positions, and SLT also received a 3% state legislated increase. So we come to one more slide and we'll open up the questions. But if the board is supportive of this and they approved it, are in a position to approve it tonight, we will be able to implement this effective on the August payroll, end of month payroll, and then the retroactive amounts, and back to your point, Ms. Edmonds, for all employees, all categories, that will make them whole going back to July 1, would be paid on the September payroll. And that's a summary of what is in probably about 100 pages worth of salary schedules.
Thank you, Mr. Nieder. And I know there's a lot of numbers to look at. One thing that I think is particularly informative is when you compare the state-based salary to the local supplement. It really shows you that when we ask for those local dollars, you can see the impact they're making for the salaries of very specific positions. So that's something sometimes if county commissioners ask you, having this document handy is very helpful because you can show them the impact that their contributions to the budget make. So at this point, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Nieder? Again, great work putting this together, and look forward to getting it in place for our staff and our teachers. Thank you. All right. We're going to shift slightly from overall budget, but still budget-adjacent issues, to transportation. I see Mr. Strickland is here. He's getting the presentation up. And Mark, will Mr. Steinmiller be here today as well?
No, he will not, but we have 4 or 5 additional subject matter experts to come and share the presentation.
All right. Wonderful.
I may have to pull a few chairs up. Still nothing. We, in some of the other committees that I'm on, we have a term we call SMEs, SMEs, and they're called subject matter experts.
That's what we call it.
And so we brought some subject matter experts here today to share in this transportation update. So what I'd like to do, first of all, before we get started, is go around the table and have everybody introduce themselves and their position, because you all likely not seen some of these fine people. So,
Good afternoon. I'm Chrissy Estes, the Senior Administrator over the northern area of Wake County.
Scott Mooneyham, I'm Director of Fleet Maintenance.
I'm Jamina Mitchell. I'm the Senior Administrator of the Western area.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Child, the Senior Administrator of our business office.
Good afternoon. I'm Bonnie Sloter, and I'm the Director of Routing and Central Logistics.
Good afternoon. I'm Dee Latrell,
Director of EC Transportation and Customer Service.
I loaded the wrong PowerPoint, I'm sorry. Sasha?
All right, well, we will welcome all of you to the board meeting, and appreciate the introduction and your specific fields of interest, so that when we ask questions, we'll be able to direct it to the appropriate person, so.
The good news is, the updated one, I think, has everybody's name. So we can have it right.
We're going to pull it up in assembly if that's okay. I apologize. I grabbed the wrong thumb drive today.
Well, the one in assembly is the updated one. So, you know, board members, if you pull it up on your laptops, you'll be able to follow along there as well.
Chair Haggard, if you want, I can go ahead if everyone has it.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I'll be glad to. I apologize.
The first slide is just a review of what we're going to talk about today, so.
So I'll start off. I'm going to cover the first couple of slides and talk through this transportation update. We're getting all the help we need over there. So our desired outcomes for today, we want to share with you all our bus driver recruitment efforts that have been going on for some time. When I say some time, the last year, I believe. There's been a lot of team members involved in those efforts, and they are proving somewhat fruitful. Also, we're going to talk about the bus routing structure for the 24-25 school year. We're going to share information about the new transport zones for the 24-25 school year. We want to talk a little bit about operations preparedness and things that we're doing to get ready for the school year and the status of that. Dee will talk some about vendor transportation. We've made a few changes with that and have some improvements that we want to continue to make in that area. Scott will talk about our fleet maintenance and where we are. And then finally, there'll be a departmental budget update from, well, but it's not advancing.
That's not what they said.
Yeah, I apologize. So there we are with our desired outcomes, and we will go from there. So next slide, please. So just a quick update of where we are. As of August of this year, as we're getting ready to roll into the opening of the traditional calendar, we have 573 field positions. That's up 13 from about where we were last year at this same time. Most recently, we've had some really good luck and success in how we are reaching out and recruiting bus drivers. Dr. Taylor stopped in a few weeks ago to a class where we had probably 30 or so candidates in there. It was great. We had good success in that class, and we hope he'll be coming back to speak to others in the future. So those 30 have enrolled into the 573 that we showed for starting the school year. And we have another 21 in our next bus driver candidate class coming up. Keep in mind, we have already scheduled out from now until December classes that will continue on throughout. We're doing these classes in-house with technology provided, trying to recruit and retain these staff members. We have had some success with this. Our numbers go up. We have a work group initiative that talks about transportation every 2 weeks, and so that's been a great group to work with, and I'll mention some more of that later. So the bus driver recruitment and retention effort has been an all-out effort by many staff members. Communications, transportation, HR. Many of us have met and come together to reach out and try to figure out a way to make our marketing effort stronger. Lisa and her team has played a large role in that. We continue to mention and show up and communicate the $4,000 in bonuses that are available to bus drivers in a variety of ways. And we also have added a dedicated HR recruiting person who does nothing but returns phone calls, looks at people who are hitting websites, reaching out to them in a proactive way. And again, we have seen results of that. It's been a long time coming, but we're seeing results. So as we start the new year, the traditional calendar year starting up, so as we stand right now, and we'll talk about some more of these specifics a little bit later, all riders assigned to a route have a permanent driver as we stand right now. Keep in mind, that is using our full-time permanent subs, so we still don't have anybody in the bullpen when people call out. And we do have, on a traditional day, we could have anywhere from 8 to 10% of our staff not show up. So just keep that in mind. We're better off than we were last year. We continue with our recruiting efforts, but we still have that to deal with. We will continue to utilize the double backs and the hub systems that we've used last year. Again, we started that success last year in conversations with you all, and that's proven to go well. As we get ready to start school in a few weeks, we anticipate and hope that all of the routes will deliver students on time. That means before the morning bell. We do have some routes that we continue to work on. There are just a handful of those that staff is trying to work through. And so that's a small number, but they're working to get that resolved before the first day of school. We will continue to deliver students up to 40 minutes before the AM bell. This is something that we talked to you all about last year. This is some of the flexibility that we needed to get everyone to school on time. And again, that has proven successful for us. And then we're working, or have worked on better communication to affected schools and families with our updated bus process when we do have late buses. And that is going well as well. Next slide, please. And I'm not sure who's doing the next one. Bonnie, okay.
I'm just going to give you a brief overview of where we stand now with our routes and our students assigned. Right now, we do have 539 planned bus routes. That's the same number that we ended this last year with. So we were happy that we were at least able to keep the same and didn't have to increase with some school changes that we had. We've got 87,930 students currently assigned. And I think that's about the same numbers we usually have assigned at the beginning of every year. As we start to learn, who doesn't ride by checking manifests, that number will come down some. That gives us, we've got about 3,500 actual runs. And when I say a run, that's just when a bus goes out, picks up for one school, and comes back in. So each of our buses has an average of 6.44 runs, which is actually a very high average for the country. So we're glad that we're able to do that. We have an average of 147 bus riders per bus. And as Mr. Strickland already mentioned, right now we do have a driver assigned to every route, but that also does include on-call subs, full-time permanent subs, and even some of our team leaders are going to start out driving. So we still do need to continue the efforts to recruit and retain these bus drivers. Some of the school changes we had this year, opening Woods Creek, we opened them as a multi-track year-round. Swift Creek is swinging to the 9th grade center this year. And of course, Fuquay Arena Middle School is in a new location. So those were all some things that happened that affected our routing this year. Some of you have probably seen this graph from Mr. Snidemiller, and it simply shows since 2018-19 school year, the number of bus routes that we've had compared to the number of drivers. And as you can see in years past, the number of routes has always been more than the drivers we've had, but it does appear that we're finally turned that corner and we now have enough drivers to have somebody in every seat, but are also starting to gain a little bit, but we just don't have enough yet to be able to cut back on that, 40-minute ahead of bell delivery time, and, cut back on some of the double backs that make it so hard and stressful for everybody.
Could you also share what might be the impact of absences on any given day?
Exactly. As soon as, I mean, if every CDL driver we had was sitting behind the wheel right now, as soon as, the areas start getting those call-outs, that's where they have to start juggling some things around. And Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Estes, I'm sure, will speak to that, because those are the things that go on out in their district. Starting as early as 4 o'clock every morning, they're having to figure out how to get other bodies to cover these routes for drivers that call out every day. Yeah. In a perfect world, it would look like it does on paper, but we don't live there yet. We did have 3 new no transport zones this year. We expanded the existing no transport zone at Green Level High School. Ms. Mitchell spoke with the administrators of that school on June the 6th, and communication went out, I believe it was June the 24th, to the families, notifying them of that change. We also added the Apex Friendship Middle School so that it now mirrors Apex Friendship High School. Again, Ms. Mitchell spoke to that administrator on June the 11th. Notification went out through communications on the 24th. And with Fuquay Varina being a new middle school, we added a no transport zone there. And again, June the 24th is when those families were notified that they were now in a no transport zone. And I believe now I'll turn it over to Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Estes.
So Ms. Estes and I are going to give you an overview about the field operations preparedness. We began working as early as May for the upcoming school year. Our teams begin to formulate the matrix with the routing department. They work closely together and discuss issues that may have happened during the school year, and discuss whether or not they can fix those issues and work together to establish the most effective pairings for the drivers. And once they've established the matrix, then we move on and we provide the matrix to the district offices, and we begin testing those routes. Next slide. So the drivers receive those routes and they test those routes, and they go out and they also test in real time. So real time means that as if school was open, they're testing and they go to each stop and they go to each school. During this process, they will document any safety concerns and any issues that may arise, such as ongoing construction or any areas that they feel that are unsafe. And they will document that, and they will return that information into their district office, and we will submit that to our routing department to correct. Next slide.
So we now have a process that, well, we've been having it for years. We're talking about the bus driver training. And in the bus driver training, we do talk about the safety issues that come up with driving a big yellow school bus and all that entails with having students on it. And we talk about the student management and all the safety protocols that we need to have in place prior to that bus getting out on the road each morning. The bus drivers do a pre-trip each morning to make sure that that bus is operational and safe to drive for the students and transporting students. In the afternoon, when they come back for the mornings, they also do a post-trip review of the bus to make sure it's functioning for the next route, but we still go through the same thing in the afternoons as far as a pre-trip is concerned. During the bus driver training, we also talk about the annual requirements that are necessary and mandatory for us to have for the bus drivers, which include the sexual harassment trainings, the diabetes trainings, the bloodborne pathogens, and seclusion and restraint trainings and other trainings that we have that are mandated for our drivers. We will be also meeting and convening all of our bus drivers on August the 14th of next week at South Garner High School to talk about a lot of these things and to just have everybody to communicate and see what's going on in the world of transportation, the new and upcoming stuff that we talk about, for as how to make sure that they are using the proper protocols for as bus stop procedures and all that is required of that. So that is our summer conference, and that's what happens there. Next slide. So here we will talk about, this is our matrix, and each district has, out of all 23 of our districts, we have a matrix. When we talked about collaborating with the routing team, this is what we do, start doing in the month of May, putting the routes together and runs and making sure that each bus that is assigned to each district can do each one of these runs. And as you will see, this is just so happens to be Green Hope, Green Level, and Panther Creek's one of their pages. There's a lot of shared runs to make sure what Ms. Sluter spoke on earlier, to make sure that we could still get to all these schools on time by doing these shared runs, and that is based on our three-tier system. You will see that on the matrix as well. So that's what our matrix looks like, and this is used daily, as they were talking about earlier, when this is the foundation of what we start looking at each morning. When a driver calls out, we have to look at what this driver has and what we will have to cover for that particular driver and how it would get covered, whether it be running behind schedule. We will announce it and put it on our bus update system. However we get it covered or not covered, unfortunately, this is how we start that whole process off each day. And finally, for me, we want to talk about the year-round and summer school programs that we opened up successfully this summer. We had 264 buses with our summer program in addition to our year-round runs. So we were very active this summer and fully staffed as much as possible by using our year-round drivers and our 10-month drivers who were willing to work. So this is how our summer school, we're very active, as you see. And we opened up, as Ms. Mitchell said earlier, Wood Creek Elementary, and that was successful. So we had a very busy summer with all of our routes that were happening.
All right, just to give you a quick recap from the 23-24 school year, we transported 3,290 total riders on special needs transportation last year. That breakdown consisted of 1,704 special needs students, 662 pre-K students, and 924 McKinney-Vento students. Of the 924 McKinney-Vento students, we had 85 of those were out of county. From our transportation vendors who provided service last school year, we have 4 vendors that are renewing their contracts for the next contract term, and I will discuss that in a little more detail on the next slide about who those are. Our vendors provided service for 232 routes last year. And last year we started with 226 routes, so it remained pretty stable last year as far as the number of routes. In the 23-24 school year, we had 750 families opt into the stipend program, and we paid $1.7 million to those families. Moving to slide 2. For the 24-25 school year, we are projecting 3,500 riders for the upcoming school year, special needs, pre-K, and McKinney-Vento. So far, we have received 59 out-of-county students to start the school year. We do anticipate that number to continue to increase as we receive more McKinney-Vento students. We have currently 283 contracted vehicles and 6 transportation vendors. So the 4 vendors from last year that are returning are CMC Transportation, Lucas Transportation, Student Transportation of America, and VGI Transportation. In addition, we acquired 2 new vendors through a rigorous RFP process.
Sheila's Transportation will be joining us for the new contract term, along with Assistance Transportation. Currently, we have 231 routes. We actually gained 5 drivers since this slide was created, so we are now at 228 routes instead. We'll have drivers for 228 routes instead of 223. We have additional drivers that are in training that will be able to cover the 231 routes in the coming days as they onboard. So as you can see, we are hovering right around the same number of routes that we had last year. We do anticipate that we will continue around that number. But as our vendors continue to increase their recruiting efforts, we will increase that number of drivers and routes. This year, we have 757 families that have opted into the stipend program. 397 have already returned their contracts, and we anticipate in the next week or two that we'll receive the remaining of those as the traditional calendar starts. And as far as what to expect for the 24-25 school year, we anticipate that it will look very similar to the 23-24 school year. If vendors are going to be delayed, they will certainly contact schools and families.
All right, this is my little piece of the presentation, the fleet maintenance update, more commonly known as bus garage. We had some DPI inspection scores up there, and before I talk about those specific scores, I'm going to give you some context that goes behind DPI inspections and what a yellow bus actually goes through with an inspection. Every yellow bus and every activity bus is required to be inspected by a certified inspector every 30 days. So every bus, every activity bus is seen by one of our certified inspectors every 30 days. To become a certified inspector, the technician has to take a class and then take a written test at the end of the class and have a score of 80 or higher. Once you pass it the first time, you're still not done. Every 5 years, you have to be recertified. So that's the process of getting certification. Every year, DPI sends a maintenance consultant to Wake County, and really every county in the state, and they randomly sample 10% of our fleet. And they essentially do a 30-day inspection on the buses that they randomly select. This year, the 23-24 school year, we had a score of 28.9. And this is like golf. Lower the score, the better. So you can see we've had some high years. This goes back 20 years. And for the last 4 years, we've done very well down below 30. And we want that trend to continue. Next slide. Much like bus drivers and other technical positions within Wake County, we have a high vacancy rate for technicians. We're at roughly 30%. We are having difficulty attracting qualified technicians. The staff we do have is absolutely outstanding. They are dedicated, they're loyal, and they do whatever needs to be done to get the job done to make sure the yellow buses and the activity buses are operating safely. I can't say enough about this staff we have down at the garage. Preventative maintenance program, DPI has a mileage prescribed program so that every certain number of miles, a bus has to come into the garage and has preventative maintenance done to it, oil change, grease, so forth. We're currently up to date. We have no late PMs for any of our buses, so that's a good thing. As a result of being on time with our preventative maintenance program and the outstanding staff we have, 95% of our fleet now is currently operable. which is great. We're taking steps into reducing emissions. We have our first 10 propane buses expecting to be delivered this month, later this month. They are clean, quote, engines, and we've talked to many counties around the state, outside the state, and we're going to test them out, see how they go. It's the same price as a diesel engine bus, so there's no additional cost for the county. So we're going to give it a shot and expect it to be a full success, and hopefully in the future buy more propane buses to reduce our emissions. That's all I got. Next slide.
Thank you. I just want to give a brief update on how we are trying to recruit and retain bus drivers from my seat by a budgetary perspective. With the board support in recent years, we've actually offered new bus driver employees a $1,200 sign-on bonus that is paid by the next applicable pay period for them. We've offered recently a $1,000 retention bonus that is paid for employees in September that were employed with us for the previous school year. And obviously, we've had our $500 semi-annual bonus that our employees, our bus driver employees and bus operations team leaders are eligible to earn twice a year. And most recently, in March of 2023, I believe it was, we were offering our bus drivers, full-time bus drivers, a $200 monthly attendance bonus up to $2,000 per year. What's not on this slide is also our bus safety assistants and our mechanics are eligible for that $200 monthly attendance bonus. I also wanted to remind the board that we continue to be aggressive in paying for bus driver onboarding costs. As you can see in the slide there, the CDL permit fees, the license fees, and then the DOT physical and the TB examination that are required before bus drivers can start employment with us. These costs right here are about, I want to say, 20% higher than they were prior to July the 1st. The DMV increased their costs for permit fees and license fees, and we actually enjoyed a 5-year contract with our vendor for DOT physicals and TB examinations. Unfortunately, we had to renew that contract, and we couldn't get the same price, but through negotiations, we are able to offer DOT physicals and TB examinations at the prices specified. So all that to say, I'm very proud of the fact that our goal is to ensure that each and every bus driver that wants to come and work for Wake County Public Schools does not have to expense a dime out of their pocket. And so, again, I wanted to stress that we are continuing to be very aggressive in our recruitment, but also our retention of our current bus drivers. And with that being said, I think that the group here collectively, we are very excited to start the new traditional school calendar. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
All right, thank you. A lot of information, a lot of different aspects of the transportation program. Opening up for questions. I know some folks have some. Mr. Hershey, we'll start with you.
In a future facilities meeting, could you all provide some information on what levels we need to get to reduce double backs, to add routes, that sort of thing, so we can have some expectations, not only as a board, but so families can understand what it takes to get there? Thank you.
And so, Dr. Inman, Ms. Evans?
Question about the vendor transport. First of all, thank you for all the information. In the vendor transport, what is the process, or is it similar? You have like a grid for dealing with absences and because, these are some of the most vulnerable in terms of, the length of time being on the transport. I just want to make sure that we are taking good care of these students.
Yes, we understand. Unfortunately, when absences happen, the vendor companies are also scrambling, trying to find a means to cover those routes, and those are the situations where you encounter the double backs, and in order to be able to get all the kids' transportation to school or to home. But we try to cover them as best we can and try and minimize the length of time that they have to wait at school or home for their transportation.
And the families are alert to it?
Yes, the vendors will call
The
the
vendor will
school
do it?
and the families to let them know.
Okay, the vendor does that?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I thought you called on me next.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure.
Can you please explain the no transportation zones, slide 8? Just what does that mean? How's that decided?
As far as how it's decided, I think this will probably be a joint answer. But every year, we look at areas within 1.5 miles of every school to determine what areas may be suitable for a no transport zone. And I can't think of the state law number right now, but we actually don't have to provide transportation to children living within 1.5 miles, but we choose to in a lot of cases. Where we think it's reasonable, we do enact these no transport zones for the families in this particular, or in these for this year. I believe, are they all in your area this year? So Janina and Ms. Mitchell and her team, they actually go out and look at the areas. They look for, what kind of things do you look for?
We look for sidewalks, whether or not it's walkable for them to get to and from school, or ride the bicycle, or however means that they choose to get to school. Safety along the way, so yes. Those are the things that we look for.
So the case of the Apex Friendship Middle School this year, we actually just mirrored the one that we have for Apex Friendship High School. We've had that one for many, many, many years. So we just decided to mirror that one and have the exact same.
So you look at it for all the schools, but the reason you landed on these 3, because this year, this is where it worked to not, right? Because if you don't find the walkability or what have you, then you, okay.
Right, and things change with construction.
Yeah.
We look for new developments, new safety improvements, crosswalks, stoplights, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Mahaffey and Ms. Caulfield.
Staying on the no transport zone, I appreciate you sharing the communication piece. For the superintendent, since our two schools are here right now, can we have those administrators reiterate to those families, or find a way to let those families know again? Because I noticed in the dates that communication went out to the schools, June 20th is after school has ended, and June 11th was the day before school ended. So just to remind folks, I think it would be helpful, and specific to me for Green Level High School and Apex Friendship Middle School, to be able to see a map and to know about like the traffic improvements that you're seeing, especially at the middle school level. There have been accidents. I know there's a big construction there. And so for me, I'd just like to know more about what's going on in those two schools, so that we can get families prepared, because I think I've already heard from at least one family with some concerns at the middle school level and walking 1.5 miles, given that Hume Olive only goes down to 35 miles an hour, and DOT, despite our best efforts, has yet to lower it. On page 5, looking at the double backs I hear a lot from families where their kid is picked up and dropped off early, but that also means that they're the kids that are staying late. And so I'm curious if in future years, there's a way to balance who's able to come early and who's able to stay late logistically, just so they're not spending that at 40 minutes and 40 minutes.
Right, and I understand that concern, but also logistically, it makes, you have to go out and get the longer route first and bring that in, and then we use those shorter routes that we can go out, in 10 minutes and be back. And I'm not 5 or 10 minutes, and so that's why it's set up the way it is. Sometimes if we have a more circular run, it's you could do what you say and alternate which one comes in first and which one comes in second. But generally, routes start at the furthest point out and come in. And we couldn't do that little short route and have the kids there an hour and 15 minutes before school to give ourselves time to go back out and get that long route and bring that back in.
And I understand the argument for and the logistics behind it. I'm just saying as we go forward, just making sure that that's top of mind for those kids, whether it's different buses at different times or I don't know, I'm not a transportation logistics expert, but I do know that that is a big burden for some of our families that do rely on bus transportation. And then on page 6, where it talks about the bus routes and the bus drivers, I think this is a great example, and I'm excited to see that positive. I think it would just be nice to delineate when we started doing the double back runs for the majority of our routes, just so families understand that even though we are turning that corner, we could still make that customer service from the parent perspective better by getting closer to the numbers that we had previously. And that is the end of my list. Thank
Okay.
you all.
Thank
I
you.
don't envy your job, and I appreciate all that you do.
I know we still have some additional questions. We had some confusion down here. If we could get a follow-up real quick. Did you want to?
I thought you were asking that if kids got there 40 minutes early, that after school they were first on the bus out. Is that, and that didn't sound like, you sounded like you were talking about alternating who gets picked up first. And I think the point was, if you get there 40 minutes early, you are on the first buses out, not waiting 40 minutes
No, because
after.
those are the longer routes.
Oh, I see what
that
you're-
come in first in the morning. They're also the ones that leave second in the afternoon, because if we can take a busload of kids home in 5 or 10 minutes that may live very close to the school, we're going to do that first and get them off campus. And then we come back and we get that longer route.
Okay, I got it.
So if we did it backwards, it would mess up the efficiency rating as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
We got Ms. Caulfield, then Ms. Rice.
It's logical.
I just have a quick
They're
question
not-
in reference to the attendance bonus. I don't know who I'm looking at. In reference to the attendance bonus, have we seen a difference since we put that in effect? That
Not really.
Like we had hoped,
Yeah. That or the,
or any of them.
or the sign-on bonus.
so the sign-in bonus or the attendance bonus is really not making a difference?
No, ma'am.
Well, I mean, we didn't have anything to gauge it against, so I mean, it is making a difference in terms of we're paying and then people are staying and fulfilling it, whether or not we see some incremental gains as we move forward. Now, the jury's out on that.
Okay, Ms. Rice.
Thank you guys for all of this hard work that you've been doing to support our students and get them home safely. I too needed to echo Ms. McCaffey of the sense of urgency and importance of communicating with families. Put it probably a little bit more eloquently than I might am getting ready to put it, but while I do understand you have processes that you have to go through, I really do want us to take a more keen look at how we're communicating with families from a family's perspective, okay? Reason being is that we also have students with disabilities or students with chronic illnesses, and we have these students I have here the 40 minutes early. Then there's no staff at the school. Students are outside. And then, I always like to make it a little bit direct. So if you got a child like mine who has a chronic illness like sickle cell disease, and it's 55 degrees outside, this child now ends up in a sickle cell crisis before the school day begins because they're outside 40 minutes waiting to be able to get into a school. So I really wanted to drive home and support what Ms. McAfee is saying is while I understand we have boundaries, I need for us to please share some future innovative ways of eliminating this process or looking at how will we effectively communicate with the base school if we need to, of looking at these families with disabilities, looking at families whose children have to take medicine at a certain time of the day, especially in the afternoon. I certainly have numerous constituents that share their concerns about transportation and children with some level of disability, or most importantly, chronic illnesses, that transportation affects literally their health. And so I know that we're doing the best that we can. I'm going to ask that if we can even, I don't know if this is a Dr. Taylor situation and team. I don't know if you guys are using methodology of looking at the bus system and determining what Lean Six Sigma principles can you use to be more efficient with our bus system, with our attendants, with our bus drivers. So it's because we have so many students, so many touches that transportation does. I just have to encourage us to think outside the box if we need to best serve these families and really think about the family perspective when we're talking about, I know they feel like that, but we can't. We got to do something different. It's like we can't use that we can't do anything or we can't help it. It's just not going to work for families that where them not having transportation or sitting at a school 40 minutes prior, no teachers that can come in the building yet. I'm going to stop, but we just can't. We can't just say we can't. We have to figure it out of what it looks like, and we can't just say this is all we can do. We have to be a little bit more innovative, a little bit more aggressive about how we can figure it out, even if it means coordinating with our base schools. I don't know what that looks like, Dr. Taylor, with transportation department. I don't know what that looks like with our chief of schools and other leadership team, but all I know is saying we can't is unacceptable for me.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Mr. Swanson?
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I first want to say thank you as well for all the hard work that goes into this and juggling multiple moving pieces. I had a question about the no-walk zone. Is that, I know you mentioned state requirements, but is that also includes the number of routes that we have, or drivers that we have for these routes? Does that play a factor in the no-walk zone? Or no transport zone?
I would say yes.
So hypothetically, how many drivers would we need to eliminate some of these no-walk zones? Because and the reason why I'm raising that question is for instances like this when it's raining and whatnot.
Yeah, I think we have 125 schools with no transport zones, and to get you that number, it would take a study. I'll have to go back and create a project to see how many more buses it would take to include all those kids.
Or drivers, I would love to see that at some point. And then the other piece, and I have one more, Mr. Chair. I've also heard from families about the stipend piece, how complex that situation or that process is.
Yes.
Is there a way that we could streamline that to make it a little bit more simpler for families to fill out the paperwork or whatever the steps are? just to make it easier on their part, because I know that this is a situation that we hate to be in, but how can we make this a little more easier for the families?
And I think Mr. Nieder has.
Yeah, we have heard that feedback, and actually our finance department is working with transportation exactly on that. How can we facilitate it and make it a simple, relatively quick process? So we're aware that there's some improvement, so we're on it.
Right, thank you.
Really making sure they understand, that's what I've been getting back, the process of what has to actually happen.
Right.
Because sometimes they don't know that they need to turn in this form and that form within those few days.
And we're trying to simplify it for parents.
Good.
And we may even use the DocuSign product as a piece of the solution.
And mobile friendly for uploads.
Yes, yes.
And so I had a really great conversation with a parent about this whole process. And so that's where I was able to have a conversation with finance and transportation. And there are absolutely ways that we can be more efficient at all of that. And so I'm looking for that to be completely different than what it is now. And it's about documents that we collect, whether or not we collect more than we need to on a monthly basis. But a really good opportunity to understand what that process is. And I know we can absolutely get better at that really quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So I appreciate everything that's gone into the presentations, and I appreciate how you touched on so many different aspects of it. One thing, just as we, unless the Vice Chair has any.
No.
Okay. I don't want to close this out prematurely. One thing as we close that I just want to be sure of is, we've done a good job filling the positions that are open, but the number of positions that we have may or not be right-sized to our district. And, it's shocking to me when we look back at like 2018, 2019, and we had 762 routes. And within, 6 or 7 years, we're down to 539 routes. I think, with the crisis that we've had filling these positions, I understand all the different strategies and tactics we've taken, the double backs, the 6.44 runs, right? But ideally, this is something as a district we need to work on. We need more drivers, we need more routes. That'll give us more options on bell schedules, more options on school start times. That will, that'll help us address the situation with no transport zones where we have hardships. So we still have a lot to do. I don't want to diminish any of the hard work that you've done, but I also don't want to say, hey, we've done a good job of filling these positions and declare victory when we still have all these other issues out there. It'll really improve all of our school communities if we have more drivers, more routes, and more flexibility. So thank you for all the hard work, but I think we do have additional work left for us. Okay. All right. That takes us to 5:18. We're only 3 minutes over on our schedule.
Motion to go to close.
We have a motion to go to closed session just so we can address a few quick items. We have a second from Ms. Rice. All in favor of Mr. Hershey's motion to go into closed session for the statutory reasons stated in our meeting agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll now move into closed session. We'll take a minute for the room to transition. Thank you.